Hello, friends. Bishop Andy C. Luter here, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the weekly Clergy Roundtable. I'm representing the Hollywood Full Gospel Baptist Cathedral of Amityville, New York, as well as the Queens Ministry, located in Queens Village of New York City. And I am joined today by two of my colleagues, and we're going to have a rather robust conversation about what is perhaps the most pressing issue in our nation today, and that has to do with the incident that took place in El Paso. We will probably touch on the situation in Dayton as well. The details of Dayton are still unfolding as we speak, but what is apparent and not in dispute is this attack on the Hispanic community in El Paso. So before we tackle that topic and sink our teeth into this matter, let me yield and invite our president of the Ministerial Alliance here in North Amityville to say good morning to us.
Grace and peace be multiplied to each and every one of us and those who are watching via Facebook. I am Pastor Hayward, the pastor of Bethel AME Church in Copiague, Long Island. We are the oldest African-American congregation on Long Island in New York.
Thank you, Brother President. And bouncing to Buffalo.
God bless you, brothers and sisters. Honor and a privilege to come before you. I am Pastor Jeffrey Barnes of the Love Alive Fellowship Full Gospel Baptist Church here in the Buffalo area. And we look forward to this dialogue with our colleagues.
Thank you, Bishop. And again, I am Bishop Andy C. Luter of the Hollywood Full Gospel Baptist Cathedral in Amityville, New York, and the Queens Ministry of New York City. Brother President, I'm going to begin this conversation with you because you pastor a congregation that ethnically identifies itself, African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I therefore would assume that you would have a sensitivity in terms of what we're talking about today, the attack on the Hispanic community in El Paso, Texas, from what is obviously white domestic terrorism, racist attitudes that have gone into the writing of an essay that was posted literally minutes before the attack took place. Also, as a pastor of an African Methodist Episcopal Church, your denomination suffered a very similar attack not too terribly long ago in the state of South Carolina. So I believe that you are best suited in terms of those of us who are gathered here today to launch our discussion regarding domestic terrorism.
Thank you, Bishop. The incidents that have occurred recently in our country, El Paso in Texas, just continuously takes the scab off the wound as relates to what happened in South Carolina at Mother Emanuel Church, where 9 persons were brutally gunned down. There's a documentary concerning that incident that was produced by Steph Curry and another individual, I don't recall their name at the moment, who was sensitive enough to continue to look at the events that took place and the effect that it had on persons in that community, and especially those family members of the victims whose lives were lost. What's happened in our country, it seems to me that the country takes on the personality of its president. And our president has been spewing remarks, sentiments against persons of color, against persons of minority-based persons, which seems to somehow has triggered and fueled the fire continuously of racial divide in our country. There was one incident in New Zealand of a mass shooting with an assault rifle. The very next week, that weapon was banned from the country. We have had a number of incidents that happened in our country in mass shootings with the same assault weapon, but it goes ignored with the number of persons that have been killed in our country. I was with a young lady yesterday, one of my college students, who was sharing with me that she had to do one course, and the discussion came up about gun violence and gun control in the country, and it was very heated discussion in that class setting, she indicated to me that the number of persons that have been murdered through mass violence in this country since 1988 is unbelievable. The gentleman that did the shooting and what was posted before the event took place was a clear indication that social media needs to be monitored even closer. What intrigues me, my brothers, is that when a person, a Caucasian, causes these things to happen and is the perpetrator, the response is always a mental health issue. But if it was one of us, I don't understand that. I don't understand how an African American can be pulled over for a traffic violation and be beaten brutally or even killed. But it's always mental health issues when it comes to white persons. But if we do something, it is always a family background. It's always this child was just violent and just angry. So with what's happening in Texas, it is clearly an attack on our Latino community. And this is something that we really have to galvanize our communities together. I've received phone calls from 2 Muslim imams, and they have expressed their sentiments, and we're going to reach out to them and sit and dialogue with them as well. Because what happened to them is still fresh for them. And what happened in South Carolina is still fresh for us. So there has to be a healing in our community. But it starts with the rhetoric that's coming from our White House. It starts from the rhetoric that's being defended by the Republican Party. And I just truly don't understand how we can continue to have these weapons of destruction in our community in the hands of persons, and the NRA just turns a blind eye. I just don't understand the motives that they have for us not really looking at this situation and looking at the weapons that are being used, and also the communities that are being affected. The whole country now is being affected. So this is one thing that I believe that the church needs to now have a major voice in counteracting this problem.
Indeed, indeed. Bishop Bowens, we've had an attack on a synagogue in Pittsburgh. We've had an attack on a mosque in New Zealand. We've had an attack on a church in South Carolina. And yet New York, Buffalo are removed from these locations. And being somewhat removed, there is a temptation to separate ourselves and see that as events, or see those as events that don't necessarily touch us. Being in Buffalo, removed from Pittsburgh, removed from New Zealand, removed from South Carolina, how do you teach your people or instruct your people to have some emotional investment, some connection, some attachment to these events, as opposed to shielding themselves with distance and assuming that it does not touch them?
Thank you, Bishop. I think that's one of the statements that we hear very frequently from many of the people who have been exposed to this kind of domestic terrorism. They don't believe that it can happen here. So one of the things that I try to do is to emphasize to people to be alert, to be vigilant, and to be on your guard. There's something in the atmosphere. There's something that has been brewing, and our government has pretty much released it, and people feel emboldened to go and do whatever comes to their mind or thoughts. I was looking down the street the other day in my neighborhood, and I saw one of the oddest things, and I couldn't figure it out, but it bothered me. It was 2 Caucasian fellas standing in the middle of the street, and one of them had his arms out as to acknowledge or make some type of confession to another Caucasian guy. And it was very alarming to me. even to the point that after I returned back home, I went and asked one of the neighbors, did they pay attention to that? Was that, because they were on their porch. I was taking alert because I live in a predominantly white community. And I was wondering, what message was that sending? What is going on behind the scenes? What's going on? And so with the internet and then with other people influences, this domestic terrorism is leaving a lasting impression and an impact on many lives. And I don't think that our government is in any position to make any changes. Yes, we got to pray that it be, for the most part, I guess, not completely released, but for the most part, I think that we have to pray for our government, but I don't see it changing. We are in disarray. We are in disorder. I don't know what the Russians had in mind when they got with the Trump administration, but whatever they did is working, and it is causing chaos, confusion, and conflict in our society. And we must, as the people of God, stand up, speak out, and intercede on behalf of God's people.
Thank you, Bishop. Well said. Brethren, let me take us all back to the pulpit, and let me confess that last Saturday I had prepared what I thought was an effective, evangelistic, bibliocentric message, absent any political overtones. It was spiritual. We all wrestle with the summer slump, and so I was trying to craft a sermon that would be meaningful for a summer crowd. And yet, when these two events took place on Saturday, I felt myself compelled to abandon what I had prepared. And following the Spirit of the Lord, I felt a mandate to really address this situation from the pulpit. And so I began to scamper and began to hastily put together my thoughts so that I could speak to the people with a relevant contemporary message that reflected what was going on in our society today. So let me come back to you, President Hayward. What kind of obligation, what kind of responsibility do we have? One of the things I said to my congregation was that I felt that I would be derelict and irresponsible as a preacher if I ignored this situation and didn't attempt to apply the message of the gospel and the message of the Bible to the hurt and the pain that our people were feeling on this particular weekend. So what kind of responsibility do we have to reflect contemporary society in our pulpits on Sunday when it comes to what our people need to hear?
Wow, Bishop, you have hit the nail on the head. I had a guest preacher come in on Sunday, and he talked about fear, which was quite appropriate to the events that are taking place in our country and where we live in New York. I was with a gentleman yesterday at breakfast. He is 88 years old, and he said to me he refuses to go on vacation. He refuses to go anywhere where a large number of persons congregate because of what's taking place. And the church now, I believe, have to be the voice of community to share a relevant word to our community on not just safety issues, but Bishop Bowens had mentioned it earlier, how the healing process that needs to take place in our country. So what I've been going through my mind is a number of things. Is one of the statements that Malcolm X has made: America has been so evil that the chickens have come home to roost. And what it is so tragic. And our pastor that retired from in Chicago, Dr. Wright.
Jeremiah Wright.
Jeremiah Wright, and what his settlements have been over the years about America and what we have done, how we've brutalized each other, how we've looked down our noses on different groups of people and ethnic relations that have been just destroyed and a breach that needs to be repaired. So there's a message that we have to share. One of the statistics that I was given last night, since 2002, there have been 54 mass shootings in America. And our children now is our Vacation Bible School week, and I'm changing the format to even address this with our children in Vacation Bible School of being relevant. So now here we have a generation that's becoming a norm for them. Our millennials are saying that this is something that's happened continuously, and how do we address this when we have a vile tongue that's spewing all of this rhetoric from the White House? We know from the rallies that have taken place, all we've heard was send them home, send them back. And these are the kind of things that spur this behavior. So it's quite relevant, Bishop. I think you did an excellent thing with changing the message on Sunday. And so we're changing the message here this week in our Vacation Bible School. Our theme is building lives one brick at a time. But when the brick keeps being destroyed and knocked down, how do our children now look at this? Well, I think one of the things that we need to look at as well is the message that is being perpetrated to our children, how they're being desensitized through video games. You go to the movies, you watch TV, and everything's being is a shoot 'em up. Where are the family type movies that we had? Where are the family type games that we had when we were children? I think all of this factors in our message from the pulpit to our people. We don't want anyone to be afraid to go on vacation. We don't want anyone to be afraid to go to the Walmart. Remember back in the day when we were younger, the shootings took place at the post office. So it somehow seems that there's an open invitation in the community where this white supremacy is just running rapid through our country. And I'm appalled because our elected officials who have the ability to make these changes are not making these changes. Yes, the Lord's word says to pray, but faith without works is dead. And we have to play our part, play our role in being a voice in community. I believe that the plight of the African American is still going to come to the Black church. And we have to do what we need to do in the midst of our summer slump. Don't wait for the masses to come back. I think one or two can carry the message through our community and on our blocks, in our supermarkets where we shop, our shopping centers, our local malls, that these things have to be addressed and have to be looked at. So we're going to galvanize the Ministerial Alliance, not just in our local area, but we're going to send out to the whole county on what do we need to do as a church? What security measures do we need to take as a church so we don't have this continual episodes that go on? We've seen it in Mother Emanuel, we've seen it in the mosque in New Zealand, and we've seen it. In matter of fact, there was another church where there was a shooting that took place, and then what took place in the synagogue in Pittsburgh. Why are the houses of God being targeted? So there's something that has to be seriously looked at, not just a discussion, but put some meat and some flesh on the bones so we can carry this message so change will take place.
Thank you, Brother President. Very well said. Bishop Barnes, I'm coming back to you so that you can comment on the same item, the same responsibility, or what I'm suggesting is a responsibility that we have to use our pulpits as a platform to speak truth to power. But while you're answering that question, and President Haywood brought up the issue of Jeremiah Wright, one of the sermons that I have been wrestling with is a sermon entitled Was Right, Right? And of course, the president and the Black community received a great deal of flack several years ago when sermons were released from Jeremiah Wright, where he was talking about acts of white supremacy and attack and assault on our Black community resulted in a certain reaction and response that we were entitled to have. And of course, he took a great deal of flack. And now here we are with this incident in El Paso. We have the president having made prepared remarks that seemingly contradict what he says on the campaign trail. So as a part of your response and a part of your answer, Bishop Bowens, I want to ask you the rhetorical question, was right, right?
Thank you so much, Bishop. Apparently, there was some truth to what he says, because it is coming home to roost. One of the things, if I may quote something from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, he said, America would never be destroyed from the outside if we falter and lose our freedom. It will be because we destroyed ourselves from the inside. And I think that that's what's taking place. We allow the media, in particular, Fox News Channel, who's been spewing out these kinds of divisions, factions, and sectarianism for some time. Not only that, the politics have gotten so awful, you know, and I'm trying to make a parallel and a comparison historically to what is transpiring. And the only person that I could come up with was President Andrew Johnson, who was the president after Abraham Lincoln. And one of the things that he did after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, he allowed many of the Confederates to enter back into Congress to make decisions for the North. So that spirit continued to reside in our society. And consequently, it has never been dealt with. We haven't gone to the root of the matter. We have wiped it over. We have sort of allowed some advances, but for the most part, we're still dealing with the same issue. And I think this is an uncovering of the root of the matter, of really where we are. And a lot of Caucasian people has to look into themselves and see, are they carrying that racial stigmatism, whether they're carrying misogynist, whether they're carrying xenophobia, all of these different things, trying to make themselves superior or better than someone else. And we have a president who is also endorsing these kinds of behavior and then come back and say, oh, I'm sorry, or I'm gonna come and visit you. Oh, it's time out for that. School is out and the kids is playing. We need to deal directly with these issues and begin to make some changes and transformation. And as I forestated previously, I don't know if it's gonna happen on his watch, but it has to happen. So we're gonna continue to look to God for guidance, grace, and direction, and know how to fix our nation.
Amen. Amen. President Hayward, I want to turn back to you, and of course, the remarks, the sermon of Jeremiah Wright, who actually hails and whose home is in Philadelphia, a place that you know very, very well, was considered inflammatory at the time. It was considered race baiting. It was considered hostile to the mainstream of America. But I want to raise the rhetorical question to you. He certainly cited and observed and identified a number of items of critical concern to not only our community, but our nation. And he suggested that America has behaved in a wrongful fashion. And so I asked you the question, was Jeremiah Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, was he, as we reflect upon El Paso and some of these other events of mass shootings, has some of his remarks turned out to be accurate and right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go through 2018 before we get to 2019. Las Vegas, Nevada, a country music concert taking place outside of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. 49 persons murdered. Virginia Tech, 2018, 32 people murdered. Sandy Hook, 20 adults murdered and 6 children murdered. It seems to me that Jeremiah's been right for a long time. The problem is when we don't have unifications of people, this seems to go and falls on deaf ears. When we had the incident in 2016 in South Carolina, the AME Church decided we're all going to get together and realize that the funeral of Pastor Pinckney would not be able to be housed in Mother Emanuel Church. An auditorium was engaged and 7,000 AMEs showed up from across the country to attend this funeral. Every one of our bishops showed up and attended this funeral. The president of the country delivered the eulogy. We galvanized ourselves. We came together to say the doors of the church are still open after this incident. Jeremiah Wright's sermons are not rhetoric. I think they've been profound. I think they've come from on high. I think that God has used him in a manner in which America did not want to hear, and America wanted to turn a deaf ear to what was being proclaimed. And even when Mr. Obama was running for president, the question was asked to Mr. Obama when he was running, how could you sit under such rhetoric and things that are against the American culture? Well, in the American culture, when we look at that 48% of the country own weapons, I think Mr. Wright was correct. When he talked about America and how America has brutalized not just the African American culture, but the Latino culture, the Jewish culture. And then one of the things that he pointed out was this, is the truth be told, the only Americans are Native Americans. All of us are immigrants. All of us have come to America and made America what America is today. If it was not for the African American community, America would not be as strong as it is economically. So we know about the 24 million African Americans in this country, how strong we are if we will galvanize ourselves together. There's power in numbers. God concentrates his power when his people get together. I believe that. That quote I got from Jeremiah Wright. So I read a few of his books. And one of the sermons that he was preaching was Unexpected Blessings. But also in the midst of that, the dialogue of that sermon, Unexpected Blessings, there's also unexpected horror and unexpected challenges and unexpected destruction and unexpected racism. What tragedy is that we have heard the warning for years and not heeded to the warning that now we live in this country because of what Jeremiah Wright preached to us, not just from the pulpit in Chicago, but what makes it more interesting is the denomination that he was a part of is a predominantly Caucasian denomination. He just happens to be in Chicago and has the largest African American congregation. In the midst of that congregation, there were still some Caucasian persons, but he is in a denomination that's predominantly white that did not stand with him with what he has been saying about America. And which takes us to another step, Bishop. And if you can respond to this, not just was Dr. Jeremiah Wright right, but how come the Bible Belt, the evangelicals, would not be honest with what they see in America as juxtaposed to what we see in America? How do now we get our evangelical family to really be honest and say, this is not what God intended for us to do or be?
Indeed, indeed. Well, friends, for the last several minutes, you have been listening to President Keith Hayward of the Ministerial Alliance of North Amityville and vicinity, as well as the pastor of the Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Copiague, New York, along with Bishop Jeffrey Bowens from the Love Alive Church in Buffalo, New York. I am Bishop Andy C. Luter of the Hollywood Full Gospel Baptist Cathedral here in Amityville and the Queens Ministry in New York City. We have been reflecting upon the incident in El Paso, Texas, this obvious assault on the Hispanic community, and we've been responding to the raging rhetoric that is going on in this country that is not only divisive, but that explains to a great degree why there are acts of domestic terrorism going on in our country that seemingly is being condoned by the rhetoric that we're hearing in certain places of our country. Next week, we'll be right back here with another discussion that will be as vibrant and as engaging as this. Please tell a neighbor and a friend that on Tuesdays at around 9 o'clock, the weekly Clergy Roundtable is here, and we take time to talk about items that are relevant to our community and our nation. On behalf of all three of us who are gathered here today, as well as our absent members as well, please remember God loves you, we love you, and we look forward to seeing you real soon. God bless.